Play it with Xbox Game Pass.
Hello and welcome to the Microsoft Flight News Dispatcher for the date of October the 3rd, 2019. In today's episode, we'll be looking at the latest and greatest updates from Microsoft and their new and upcoming simulator, starting with the homepage of the website. Now, in all honesty, there is no new news for today's date. The news actually came on Monday, just gone. They held a global preview event on September the 19th and 20th. They invited a few hand-picked socialites and press, and the developers actually sat down with them in Redmond, Washington, and actually held a press conference and talked about these four topics here: the world, the sky, aerodynamics, and cockpits. Of course, these are the four episodes that are going to be coming next week and the week after, starting with World. So we won't talk about what was said at the press conference about these episodes. We'll be getting that next week. Something we will be talking, though, a little bit later on is how exactly will the Microsoft Flight Simulator be delivered to you, and how exactly will it work. We're going to technically break it down so it's easy to understand how it's going to be given to you and how you're going to use it. We're also going to be hearing firsthand from one of the socialites that attended their personal experience and their reaction. So let's dive straight into it. Earlier this month, Microsoft did a global event for media and flight simulation influencers where people were chosen that could get their hands on a build. The event took place at Rainer Flight Service facilities located in Renton Municipal Airport, and it comprised of a presentation as well as a hands-on session where they had plenty of time to get in touch with the new iteration of the Veteran Sim. Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 sits on top of a new proprietary graphics engine. It does have a few parts of the FSX core, some of which were improved, reworked, or even redone. Now, not because the development team was lazy, but because they had what was already well done, and back in the good old days, Aces Studios had already solved a huge amount of issues and surpassed nasty challenges. All that code was working perfectly, and so the team decided to use it. Don't see it as using legacy code though. It's more of, if there are modules or pieces of code that work, then use it, or find a way to improve it, just do it. If there's no need, then don't. And that's exactly what Microsoft did. So again, this is not FSX, this is not Flight Sim World, this is something new. And when speaking with the team, here's what Asobo, the studio behind the new Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020, had to say. Just like Aces Studio was the development team behind Microsoft Flight Simulator years ago, Microsoft has a separate team working on the project, Asobo Studio, a French development company with an amazing track record and are highly regarded by Microsoft, which they've created a proprietary engine that can work on gigantic worlds, just like Earth. One of their previous worlds they built was the last generation racing game, Fuel. Asobo accepted the challenge, and a few members of the team started having flying lessons and became pilots so that they would understand flight in order to make it more authentic in the sim. Now, the presentation Microsoft held had some social media figures and a few key developers from Asobo, which they had a quite pleasant surprise, as no one was actually counting on actually being able to talk to the developers that were actively developing the product that day. The world that was presented to them, which was where the new venture would start for Microsoft, the will to make a better representation of the actual world. It's something they've always had a big wish for simmers, and Microsoft is doing just that, recreating the entire globe. With the technology and resources made available to them, Microsoft feels they can do a good job now. This is partially where Microsoft Azure enters into it. The development team confirmed they are using Windows Azure AI to work the textures, remove shadows, clouds, color process the textures, understand the color and type of building roofs, placement of trees, of which there are 1.5 trillion of them across the globe, and do all the required work automatically behind the scenes to make it look good. Azure will also be used to store and distribute this data and the textures to users. Out of curiosity, Microsoft mentioned being using only 2 petabytes from all the data available at Bing. That's 2 million gigabytes. That's a lot of space. But what does this actually translate to exactly? Well, it translates to some impressive numbers. Check this out. There's over 2 million cities within the sim, 40,000 airports, which is double than what we had in the previous version. There is every single street in the world, all the mountains in their correct locations in the world. Basically, you can have the whole world emulated. In fact, Asobo says you can now fly VFR everywhere. That's everywhere, straight from out of the box as default. That is massive. Now, there are 3 ways that you can enjoy this, Asobo say. There is an online mode, an offline mode, and a hybrid mode. Now, the online streaming of data is something that has been worrying a lot of future users. Like, a lot of people have been saying, do we need to be online the whole time? Will my internet connection be very good? I have a slow internet connection, so I won't be able to enjoy the sim. Now, there's just a couple of examples of how folks are really getting to worry about the streaming of it all, and rightly so, really. Microsoft has told us that there will be 3 levels of detail or bandwidth usage: online, offline, and hybrid. The online mode is where everything will be amazing and perfect, the highest quality possible if your bandwidth allows you. 4K, 60 frames per second, beautiful world. If it doesn't match up, if your bandwidth is a little bit slow sometimes, or if it drops out, you can use what's called adaptive streaming. And that basically, it's where the sim basically verifies your bandwidth and then displays the scenery in the best way possible, taking into account your limitations with your bandwidth, so you have your best experience. Now, of course, that is like something we've never had, and that to me is massive. Of course, there is an offline mode as well for those who perhaps get dropouts in their connection and can't rely on a constant stream. You can go offline, completely offline, and not have to stream or download anything. You literally, the sim will still have great quality, by the way, and it's still, the offline mode will going to be miles ahead of current sims out there right now that are filled with loads of add-ons. But if you don't have an internet connection, you still will be able to have great quality scenery with a high level of quality and accuracy. Basically, all it means is that you will at some point download it to your hard drive and run it from there. Of course, there is also the hybrid version of this, which is where, as you're streaming, your computer is also caching parts of the scenery and downloading it on the fly as you go online, and then using that information when it needs to display it, and then dumping it when you don't need it. So this allows for you to, for example, download high quality imagery data for a region you want to fly at, maybe during the night whilst you're asleep, and then the next day wake up and go fly, and it'll continue to download in ahead of you where you are in the sim, and then dump the scenery behind you that you're not going to use, and that can be completely offline as well. So between these 3 modes, you basically will find any way to use the sim. Now, I'm going to go into more detail exactly how you're going to get this delivered to you a little bit later on. But they also did talk about the world, the grass, the sea, the waves, everything in there. And you know, there's a couple of things that have always been a major problem in Flight Simulator. Basically, grass and water. To actually emulate it perfect, grass has taken a lot of processing power, and water, because of the amount of processing power units, whatever you want to call it, needed to process the display of water. They're very dynamic. They're always moving. You know, the wind has to be taken into account, the depth of the water, the volumetric, and all this processing power. It basically is the culprit for low frame rates in past sims. But this is something that Azure AI will be doing in the background for you. Your computer won't need to actually simulate all this stuff. you will have that streamed in from somewhere else. So Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 promises to not only have millions of pieces of geometric grass, which is the 3D grass, but the sea will also have waves created by the wind. And a lot of the socialites had a chance to see it in action with the hands-on version as they passed by rivers, and they stated it was very nice to watch, to see. And so your computer won't be having to handle all this. It will actually be streamed in from basically another source, another computer. You know, the NASA computer that Microsoft have. The sky as well, though, the lighting, the atmospheric effects, and the weather, these will be main areas covered, and Microsoft basically, they went through them, and they displayed screenshots, and they've even shown 30 minutes of the video you're watching now. I'm not going to go into too much detail because that is actually the second episode or the first episode of what's coming next week, so we'll get into that to more detail next week. They also talked about the aerodynamics of the planes. Again, we're not going to get into too much detail with that because that's coming in a future episode, but to say basically the planes are being heavily simulated to the level of detail that it far exceeds current sims. So you know, and it doesn't inflict on frames either. So again, that's like another massive win for everybody. Basically, highly detailed planes and sims, but without having to sacrifice quality at the same time. Cockpits, something they mentioned, were interactive checklists. Also, they talked about third-party developers. And without going into any details, Microsoft indicated they are already in contact with third-party developers, which they realize is one of the big reasons of all the advances and the survivability of every Microsoft flight simulator throughout the years has been the third-party community. So most likely that one will come in the form of airports and regions that are yet to be created within the sim. You know, the footage you're seeing is actually pre-alpha build from, you know, earlier this year, and most likely what the socialites, you know, what they saw in September as well. Now we're in October now, so they've actually continued development, and by the time we get it next year, they will have far advanced what we actually see right now in this video. But there still will be gaps, and that's where third-party developers will come in. They will fill the holes of areas that haven't been created, airports that can be further developed on, and so there will be more room. Even the planes, you know, third-party developers can input planes into the sim. And one thing I'll mention now is that you know, Asobo took over development from Ace's studio, basically, of FSX. They had the core code given to them, and like we stated before, they basically dumped what they didn't want, what didn't work, and they kept, you know, a lot of the core code from FSX, and then, you know, advanced it further. So a lot of your old add-ons for P3D and FSX will be compatible to some degree within the new Microsoft Flight Simulator. Unfortunately, X-Plane won't be compatible. They're all left to hang out. But all earlier versions will be backwards compatible with certain add-ons, maybe even with a modification to it. But, you know, don't throw away your add-ons for FSX and P3D just yet. You still will be able to use some planes in the next iteration of the sim. The community, Microsoft also addressed the fans and the community. You know, they let everyone know that they're actually watching social media very carefully. YouTube, the forums within the various flight sim websites. You know, they're monitoring magazines, articles, and everything else that provides them with the information for what the community actually wants and desires for the next generation sim. They really want to do justice to what they haven't done in the past. So far, Microsoft has been very, you know, slowly giving us this information, and despite some videos and screenshots, there was a lot out there until, you know, the article broke about the preview event. That it goes out to say that Microsoft actually care about this iteration of the flight sim. They want it to be completely backed by the community rather than them turning their back on the community. Now, we're going to get into how exactly Microsoft will deliver this to us and exactly how it works technically in a moment. But this is what one person had to say when they were face to face with the developers. What I cherish most of the whole thing, though, is the FaceTime we had with developers. Unfortunately, because of some minor organization hiccups, I personally didn't get to interview anyone, but I have spent so much time talking to everyone in the development team, I don't really care. I spoke with everyone out there and I was able to congratulate them, and I looked in their eyes for the hard work and I thanked them with what they've done with the sim so far. Everyone, every single one, seems passionate, interested. They were listening to us, eager to show their work. They were all in that same room. It wasn't we and them. I didn't feel like it was divided. It was all of us together, united for a goal, the love and the passion for flight and for flight sim. The person also went on with their hands-on, juicy sort of, this is what they thought of what they actually got to physically see in the sim at the time. So they were given the presentation, they were led to an adjacent room where there were all these booths set up where they all got to sit down and actually try hands-on Microsoft Flight Simulator for the first time. And listening to menu music, the person, one socialite said they were presented with a very nice, modern, clean user interface, which gave for a great first impression. Microsoft had also set up default airports to be the same, which were at Renta Municipal Airport, but honestly, I was more interested in throwing Microsoft and Asobo a little bit of a curveball. So I started a flight in Portugal. I wanted to fly around the area and Lisbon. So considering how bad flight sims usually treat Portugal, this was a nice test. One that Microsoft passed. Not exactly with flying colours, as some landmarks were missing, namely the huge red Golden Gate Twin Bridge in Lisbon, but hey, it's passable. I'm sure someone will add that as well as other important buildings in the future. But overall, I was very impressed. Flying around the area felt fluid, it felt live. I changed the weather, and every change was immediate with stunning results. We had both themes and real world weather available. I couldn't find how to customize weather, but I guess it wasn't available at all. The sky looked beautiful. Clouds were amazing, and they cast shadows on the ground and on each other. The color of the sky was beautiful and the lighting amazing. And with each change, you'd get different wind, different pressure, different temperature, and aircraft behavior. The rain was absolutely stunning. Idling the engine allowed me to pay better attention to how the raindrops were audible on the fuselage. Flying in Microsoft Flight Simulator is so much challenging than flying in its older counterpart. Granted, there are no helicopters yet, so I had to fly around on a fixed wing. But I tell you, it was the most fun I had with fixed wing aircraft in a long time. The sense of discovery, the new amazing scenery, the way the sky is rendered, and the physics and flight dynamics make it all just come to life. No more rails, no more stiff planes. I did some more flying and I had to do the ultimate test. I tried the Azores. Mainland Portugal is always very poorly treated, but the Azores, those islands are thrashed around by pretty much every single sim. The Azores is a beautiful place to visit and fly, but there's no good rendition of it. Not anymore. Granted, it's not perfect, but the islands are there. I took off from Horta and turned to the Pico Island, and there it was. A huge mountain, the tallest one in the country, majestically rising itself from the bottom of the ocean to touch the skies and the clouds around it. Well, not around it. The clouds seemed to be coming from the right and climbing to the top. There were clouds on the left as well, but at a higher altitude, as if they climbed and continued their path a few hundred feet higher. I lost myself in the sim. All the options are fairly accessible, although I do feel like some UI tweaks may be needed. I provided that feedback to the developers and QA folks present, which took notes of everything we said, but other than that, it's very well built. In fact, considering it's an alpha stage, it's freaking damn impressive. It didn't feel like an alpha at all, except the couple of times I actually crashed the sim. One of them so that they had to actually replace my computer. So there we go. Now, how does it actually work technically, and how is it exactly going to be delivered to you? Let's get into that right now. So Microsoft will most likely deliver it through digital download. Microsoft has never talked about a disk-based delivery system. They've only ever talked about digital through the Game Pass system, first on PC and then on Xbox. Now, for those who don't know, Game Pass is a subscription-based model where you pay X amount a month, and then you have unlimited access to a lot of free games, and a lot of games you also pay for. But mainly the 99% of them are free. So most likely Microsoft Flight Simulator will be free for the initial default, or you will have to pay a certain amount for it from the get-go. But you will not have to pay a subscription to Microsoft Flight Simulator for the use of the simulator. That will go to the Microsoft Game Pass for the use of the whole system, which the simulator will sit upon. Now, you're going to download a file, probably unpack it on your computer in the range of between 10 gig to 30 gig initially, and you'll be presented with a menu, most likely the Earth globe that you'll be able to zoom in and out of, pick your destination, pick your airport that you will take off from, pick your aircraft all from this initial menu system, which will feel intuitive to use. It will be very simple, very easy to start a flight. Now, once you're in the world and you're flying around, you will be able to exit back to the main menu very quickly, very fluidly. But the whole delivery system will be a digital download. I don't really think it will be a disc-based system. You won't be able to buy this in the shops. It'll only be available through download. So an internet connection initially will be needed. But once you actually got it loaded onto your system, the default that you have will be good enough to fly straight away. It won't be as good as perhaps what we see right now. There will be some elements that you still need to then go live to stream into using Azure AI. Because the way it works basically is much like FSX, which was layered like a cake. So you had mesh files, then you had texture files, then you had the land class and the vector information put on top of that. This is exactly the same way. They're using core code from FSX and using it in the same way as to make it backwards compatible with some planes and some scenery regions. So the fact is, the way that the world is going to be represented is you're going to have Bing Maps as your base layer, but that's got a lot of holes in it. Even though it's filled with 3D objects, with buildings and 3D objects such as vegetation, there's still going to be a lot of gaps in it, and a lot of gaps that aren't rendered in high quality. Bing Maps is basically Google Earth, and if you go onto Google Earth and go into the app, there is actually a simulator available within the app, but when you go around the globe, you can put it into a 3D mode, and you can actually see, say, New York represented like New York in a 3D space. In fact, I did a video about this literally as soon as the trailer was announced. I got a lot of hate for it because people thought it was actually Microsoft 2020 when it was actually Google Earth. But this seems to be the way that they actually are delivering it to us, in kind of the same way as Google Earth, but using Bing Maps, where you have almost a workable base, but then Microsoft Azure will fill in the gaps where necessary. It will fill it in with auto-gen trees, fill it in with auto-gen buildings or very specific buildings. Your aircraft will most likely be on your hard drive stored locally, and then the Bing Maps will be on your hard drive, but then the Azure AI will be streamed into to complete and fill in all the holes that are there. So moving forward, it does look like it's going to be more based on your bandwidth than it is on your hardware. You're not going to need a NASA supercomputer to get this going. You're going to need high bandwidth. So if you're running a connection that is very stodgy, very dodgy, you're most likely going to want to choose the offline mode, where you also download some information throughout the night. You go flying during the day and you can see it just like you see in this video, remembering that this video is pre-alpha footage. So this is like before September footage. This is the footage that most likely the socialites saw when they went to Washington, when they saw the simulator for the first time. When you get your hands on it, it's going to look a lot different. There's probably going to be more detail. Okay, it's not going to be based though off your computer system. You're not going to need high specs in order to run this. You're only going to need to have a base level of computing power to run the core, and then your bandwidth is going to make up that rest of, the rest of it in order to see what we see here. So I'm going to leave you now to enjoy the rest of this 4K footage. But next week we're going to talk about the world that Microsoft will be giving us as they show off the Discovery Series Episode 1. So thanks for watching. If there is anything that you feel I overlooked in today's episode, or if there is a topic you would like for us to discuss in next week's episode, please leave your comments below for me to consider for next week's show. And my name is Adam, and I shall see you next week. Thank you, and goodbye.